Good morning. It's the 20th of June. This is the Pisgah Reflection and I'm David. Last week we finished a bit of a mini series on Christian legalism. And I pointed out that some of us accept that God technically loves us. But, maybe he doesn't really like us all that much. A bit like the grumpy school teacher in the classroom who is forced to be with his children, and yet his form are full of children who could try harder, who are coming bottom of a class, who are chattering at the end of the classroom. People who the teacher has to put up with, and maybe God has to put up with us because he's God. He has to technically love us because that's his job. But does God really have that lukewarm attitude? Does he merely put up with us? And would that kind of an attitude have driven Jesus to the cross, to that place of excruciating spiritual, mental, and physical suffering? I'm not convinced. So we concluded last week by looking at the concept of grace and how grace describes something that is given, in this case, God's love. It's given despite our moral performance or lack of it. It's a fundamental aspect of God's fatherhood, which is a very appropriate theme for Father's Day. So we're looking at John 15, 9-17 this morning, and it shows us that the love that Jesus has for us literally flows from his Father's heart to Jesus, to us. So it's very much a fatherly theme. And that's why, according to our text, we're not described as servants or followers. Instead, he uses the highest term. He calls us friends. So we're going to read more about that now in our text, John 15, 9-17. If you'd like to grab your Bibles, maybe you'll read along with me. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. I've said these things to you, so that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be complete. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends, if you do what I command you. I do not call you servants any longer, because the servant does not know what the master is doing. But I have called you friends, because I have made you known everything that I've heard from my Father. You did not choose me, but I chose you, and I appointed you to go and to bear fruit that will last, so that the Father will give you whatever you ask him in my name. I'm giving you these commands so that you may love one another. A comedian was once talking about the things in life that baffled him. He was talking about the way in which he tries to relate to the opposite sex, especially when he was a young man. He said, why is it that you can say to a young lady that she reminds him of spring's first breath, but he can't say that she's like the final gasp of winter? Isn't it the same thing? Then he went on to say, how come you can look at a lady and say, when I gaze at you, time seems to stop, but you can't tell her that she's got a face that stops clocks because she get a nasty slap? I suppose my slightly irrelevant or irreverent, baffling thing that I'd mention is, but why is it that preachers, and I'm sure I'm doing it just as much as anybody else, why is it that preachers say something like, and finally, but then go on for another 4 or 5 points? Preachers are rubbish at coming to a finish, aren't they? So these are some slightly light and amusing things that baffle people. But there are some profound and important things that we struggle to get our heads around too, and we see some of that in our chapter today. I find when I look up at the night sky, I feel baffled. I feel profoundly touched by the sheer immensity of the universe and how the creator of said universe might even consider me, let alone love me. A few years back, we as a family went to a Calvert Trust Centre in Northumberland. This is one of those places, it's like an outward bound holiday place, but it offers accessible activities. So Michael and Sam, my disabled sons, could enjoy the same kind of things that my able-bodied children could enjoy, like going down the zip wire or using the kayaks and the cycles. It was a great place, but something else brilliant about this place was where it was based, because Northumberland has the most incredible sky. In fact, the International Dark Sky Association said it's one of the very best places in the whole of the UK to study the stars because it's so black. I mean, Cresswell, Quay, when we lived there for a few years, that was a wonderful sky too, but you're still relatively close to the likes of Pembroke Dock. But in this part of Northumberland, literally for many, many miles, there was no light pollution. And I remember one evening just standing by the sort of chalet cabin thing, looking at the sky and just feeling absolutely awestruck. I'm wondering how many people before me, how many billions of people have looked at the very same sky and had that sense of immensity. It's quite incredible. The psalmist certainly felt exactly the same way. In Psalm 8, he wrote, "When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have ordained, what is man that you are mindful of him, and the Son of Man that you visit him?" I know exactly how he felt. The great writer and pastor, Dr. R.T. Kendall, he gets where the psalmist is coming from. He wrote a very good book. It's called Do You Think to Pray? And this is what he put. He said, "I cannot imagine a greater motivation to pray than that God enjoys having me in his presence. He enjoys my company. He delights in listening to me. It is such a dazzling thought that the same God who has countless billions of angels worshipping him 60 seconds a minute, day and night, to whom the nations are but a drop in the bucket, and who knows all about every leaf on every tree in the world, also welcomes my company because I'm very important to him." So it's funny, some of us look at the night sky, the sheer size and immensity, and it actually causes us to worry that how could God of such immensity care for us? But R.T. Kendall, he turns it around and he says it's a greater demonstration of God's love. He's got so much on his plate, in other words, so much to consume his time and attention, that he would love us shows just how great and powerful that love is. And for him, it draws him all the more to prayer. To add wonder to wonders then, I find it incredible that Jesus should describe us as friends. In our text today, he said, "You are my friends if you do what I command." And then he goes on to say, "I've called you friends, for everything that I learned from my Father, I've made known to you." Friends. It's not just scale that causes me to wonder, but it's also that I know how little I deserve his friendship. Paul encapsulates it in Romans 5, 6-8. He says, "You see, at just the right time, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely will anyone do anything for a righteous man, though for a good man someone might dare to die. But God demonstrates his love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us." And in Ephesians, a very similar chapter, he uses the word enemies, while we were still enemies. So the God of the billions of stars doesn't look down and then he sees that we're so sparklingly good that actually, even though we're tiny, he's going to make friends with us. That's not why God makes friends with us. It's nothing that we do that earns God's friendship. It's just that a father or a mother naturally loves their children. Those of us listening to this who are fathers and mothers, you'll know what that's like. You love your children all the time, even when you're really annoyed with them, because they're your children. That's why God loves us. Even though he does have tiny little specky children, we're still his kids. I've often wondered about the cross as being such a strange symbol. We talk about it sometimes, don't we? Yeah, to have a symbol of execution as the emblem for our faith. It is pretty bizarre. I heard a critique of Christianity once. It was by a rather angry sounding atheist who, in this critique, it was in The Guardian actually, he went on and described pretty much every awful thing that any person who called themselves a Christian had done in the last 2,000 years. Whether or not God wanted it done. And then he kind of concluded by saying, but then what do you expect from a faith that has a symbol of execution as their emblem? A symbol of barbarism. And yet, our text suggests that this symbol is actually proof of friendship. Back to our text, verse 13. Greater love has no one than this, but he lays down his life for his friends. If a child was in the road and the bus was bearing down on them, and you ran into the road and pushed them out of the way but were squashed in the process, nobody would describe your act as barbaric. They'd say that was an act of extreme love and selflessness. Jesus declared his friendship to us in today's text. But more than that, he declared his love. But words are cheap, aren't they? I don't know who coined that phrase, but it's a good one. Jesus demonstrated that actions speak louder than words. Because of that symbol, because of the cross. When Emma and I were in the bone marrow unit in Newcastle, we were taking turns going up there looking after Michael. And sometimes you had a little bit of time off and you would sort of sit in the parents' room and meet other parents who were in exactly the same situation as you. And we met one couple and they were a pair of skinheads, probably in their early 40s, similar age to us at the time. But they both have skinheads. And they explained that their daughter was so mortified at losing her hair because of the chemo, but to help her to feel that she wasn't different and that they loved her, they had their own heads shaved. And other people in the family also had their heads shaved. Now, if they'd have just said to their daughter, oh, there, you poor thing, you're losing your hair, we still love you, that would have been nice, of course. But by shaving their heads, they were relating to her. They were demonstrating very powerfully that they loved her and stood by her. So the first point then from our John 15 text is that the cross is a symbol of friendship. Only a friend, a loving friend, the best friend, would lay down their life for someone. The second point then is that the cross is a symbol of life. In God's friendship, we have life. Now, going back to those baffled statements at the start of this talk, sometimes I struggle to get past the fact that God befriended me, that God chose to give life for me. He gave his life so I could have life. Why me? My Isaac, he's a bit of a duck fanatic. Sadly, we lost a couple of ducks recently to a fox attack. But Isaac still wants more ducks, but not just ducks for the sake of it. He wants to rehome ducks. So we're looking at ways that we can make the garden a bit more fox, I would say friendly, but a bit more fox unfriendly, if you like, to keep these ducks safe. And he was showing me some pictures recently of cage-reared ducks. I think it was in America. And these were ducks that literally never get to walk anywhere in their life. They just live in the cage until they're slaughtered for meat or they lay their eggs. But it reminded me of an expose I saw a while ago, a poultry-related expose. This was about little hens. I saw this on a little documentary. It showed this company where they'd done some secret videoing. This was the hen company in America, and they'd had these little cutesy 1950s style ranch cardboard boxes. And if you ordered one online, you'd have a little chick placed into this sweet little homely box and sent to you so you can start having your own chickens. But the expose went into the kind of a factory farm where the chicks were chosen and put into the boxes. And it showed this long conveyor belt with lots of little fluffy chicks placed on it. And you had the selectors who were standing alongside of a conveyor belt. I mentioned this in Pisgah before. And then these selectors would be choosing the chicks for height, for size, for sex, and for general appearance. And they'd take them very carefully off the travel later, put them into the box, seal them, and they'd be sent to their brand new life home. The problem was, some of the chicks weren't being selected because they didn't quite meet the criteria. And when it came to the end of the belt, they'd fall into this big metal reject bin. And then more would fall on top of them, and then more would fall on top of them. And they were literally just left there to die because they were the rejects. They were not wanted. The reason I tell you that story is because we need to appreciate the truth. Those of us who feel like spiritual rejects from time to time need to appreciate the truth of the cross, that this is not how God treats us. It's not how God selects us. He didn't choose us because we fit into a nice little box. He chooses us because he loves us, not because we've earned it. A father's love isn't earned. A father's love is given to the child the second they're created, the second they come into the world. And in God's case, before we came into the world. This is grace. Do you remember the good old days when we used to take communion before COVID came along? Well, hopefully this will be starting again soon. We've got a cunning plan to do it legally and safely in these COVID times. But there's an opening, one of the set openings in the Baptist Gathering for Worship book that really brings this truth to light. This sense that God loves us in this unconditional way. He's selected us to receive his love, not based on criteria, just based on the fact that we're his family. These are wonderful words. It's one of my favourite openings. Come to this table, not because you must, but because you may. Not because you are strong, but because you are weak. Come not because of any goodness of your own that gives you a right to come, but because you need mercy and help. Come because you love the Lord a little and would like to love him more. Come because he loved you and gave himself for you. Come and meet the risen Christ. We are his body. It's the opposite of the chicks on that travelator thing. God isn't choosing people because of their size, their appearance, their goodness. He's just sweeping the lot into his box, into his family. He chooses all, if only they will come to him. The only ones who perhaps don't go into the box are the ones who refuse to go into his box, refuse to accept his love. It's almost like he's choosing us because we're weak and vulnerable and we have this need. And his love is responding to our need. So our texters help us to see them. That the cross is a symbol of friendship, a symbol of life. And thirdly, and our final point today, the cross is a symbol of what he expects from us. In verses 12 and 17, Jesus instructed us, my command is this, love one another as I have loved you. And it's emphasised further in 1 John 3:16-18. I'm sorry for reading out so many texts, but they really emphasise love. This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. If anyone has material possessions and sees his brother or sister in need, but has no pity on him, how can the love of God be in him? Dear children, let us not love with word or tongue, but with actions and with truth. And lastly, now in John 13:35, Jesus himself says, "By this all men will know you are my disciples, if you love one another." And the cross symbolizes most powerfully of all this love. So that's the end of this reflection. Just to conclude, we've got this vast, massive God, and he chooses to befriend tiny little creatures like us. That's just one example of how extreme his love is. That vast creator of the whole universe stepped into our microcosm and suffered and died, laid down his life for his friends. This is the ultimate Father's Day present. And while we should be encouraged, and while it should help us to see that we don't earn his love, we just receive it and hopefully reciprocate it, it also encourages us to follow his example, to pick up our crosses, to put our love into actions, not just in the words we say or the hymns we sing. It's literally the only way to please him. So thanks for listening. I hope you have a lovely Sunday and a really good rest of the week as well. God bless and take care.